The mountain mist clung to Fawn Mackenzie's weathered traveling dress as she clutched her children's hands on the narrow trail leading to Hollow Creek. Wolf, 11 years old with his father's determined jaw, carried their meager belongings while 8-year-old Raven pressed close to her mother's side, dark eyes wide with uncertainty. The Cherokee blood in Fawn's veins whispered warnings about this place, but desperation had driven her. Hera mail-order bride arrangement with a trapper named Daniel Murphy was their only escape from poverty. The correspondents had promised a home, security, and perhaps even love in these wild Appalachian mountains. As they rounded the bend, she spotted the crude cabin Daniel had described, its windows dark and unwelcoming in the early morning light. The silence struck her first. No smoke from the chimney, no dogs barking, no human sounds breaking the mountain stillness that seemed to press against her ear. Wolf dropped their bundle and ran ahead to the cabin door, calling out greetings that echoed unanswered through the pines. Fawn's heartbeat quickened as she approached the structure, noting the deep claw marks gouged into the wooden walls and the scattered remnants of what had once been a front porch. The metallic scent that hung in the air made her stomach lurch with recognition. She had smelled death before during the harsh winters of her childhood. When Wolf pushed open the sagging door, revealing the ransacked interior and dark stains on the floorboards, Fawn's hopes crumbled like autumn leaves. The dream of safety and belonging that had sustained her through the long journey was replaced by the cold reality of abandonment in an unforgiving wilderness. Through the cabin's broken window, Fawn spotted fresh tracks in the mud, massive bear prints, leading toward the dense forest where shadows seemed to writhe with hidden dangers. Her Cherokee grandmother's teachings flooded back. When the great bears moved so close to human dwellings, it meant the balance between worlds had been disturbed. She gathered her children close, feeling their small bodies tremble against her, as she explained that Daniel would not be coming home, ever. Raven's tears fell silently while Wolf straightened his shoulders with fierce determination. Already assuming the role of protector despite his youth, the weight of their situation settled on Fawn's shoulders like a mountain itself. Alone with 2 children in hostile wilderness, with no money to return home, and winter approaching fast, but somewhere deep in her mixed heritage, both Cherokee wisdom and frontier stubbornness began to kindle a flame of defiance. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. A thunderous roar shattered the mountain, quiet as a massive grizzly bear emerged from the tree line, her cubs trailing behind like rolling bundles of dark fur. Fawn's blood turned to ice water as she realized this was no random encounter. The mother bear's eyes held intelligent fury, as if she recognized the human scent and associated it with threat and violence. The children froze behind their mother while Fawn slowly raised her hands, speaking in the Cherokee tongue her grandmother had taught her, words meant to convey respect and peaceful intentions to the forest spirits. But the great bear rose on her hind legs, towering nearly 8 feet tall, and released another bone-rattling bellow that seemed to shake the very mountains. In that terrifying moment, Fawn understood with crystal clarity that Daniel Murphy had not died in some random accident. He had threatened this mother's cubs, and she had responded with the ancient law of the wilderness. Time stretched like pulled honey, as woman and bear faced each other across 30 feet of rocky ground, each measuring the other's intentions with primal intensity. Fawn's Cherokee blood sang with understanding, while her civilized mind screamed with terror, creating a strange dual consciousness that allowed her to see both the immediate danger and the deeper tragedy. The mother bear's massive paws showed old scars, evidence of previous encounters with humans who viewed her as nothing more than a threat to be eliminated, and Fawn felt a surge of unexpected kinship with another mother protecting her young. Very slowly, she began to back toward the cabin while maintaining eye contact, speaking soft Cherokee words that seemed to puzzle the great creature rather than enrage her further. When the bear finally dropped to all fours and huffed once before turning to lead her cubs back into the forest depths, Fawn collapsed against the cabin wall with shaking legs, knowing that she had just witnessed something profound, a glimpse into the true nature of the mountains. Justice. Inside the devastated cabin, Fawn discovered Daniel's journal beneath an overturned table, its pages revealing the dark truth of her intended husband's character. His entries spoke boastfully of tracking the monster bear that had been terrorizing the area, describing elaborate plans to harvest her valuable pelt and sell her cubs to traveling circuses for substantial profit. The final entry, dated just 3 days ago, detailed his discovery of the bear den, and his excitement about ending the threat once and for all with poison bait and steel traps. As Fawn read these words, her grief for the man she had never met transformed into something harder and more complex, a mixture of sorrow for his ignorance and anger at his cruelty. She understood now that Daniel's death had not been the random act of a savage beast, but the inevitable consequence of his own hatred and greed, played out according to the harsh but fair laws of the wilderness he had never bothered to understand. Standing in the ruins of her dreams, Fawn faced the first critical choice of her new life: flee back to civilization with her children and accept whatever charity awaited them there, or stay and try to build something better in this place where violence had already claimed one life. Wolf and Raven watched her with complete trust, waiting for their mother to decide their fate, while wind howled through the broken cabin like the voices of restless spirits. Fawn closed her eyes and reached deep into her Cherokee heritage, seeking the wisdom of ancestors who had survived in these mountains for countless generations before white settlers arrived with their guns and their fear. When she opened her eyes again, her decision burned bright and clear as a signal fire. They would stay, not to continue Daniel's legacy of conflict, but to create something entirely different. She would honor both sides of her mixed blood by finding a way to live in harmony with the wilderness that had justly defended itself against those who would harm its children. "We're staying," Fawn announced to her children with quiet firmness, watching their expressions shift from surprise to cautious hope as she outlined her plan. She would learn everything she could about the bears and the mountain ecosystem, using her Cherokee knowledge combined with careful observation to understand how humans might coexist peacefully with even the most dangerous predators. Wolf nodded gravely, while Raven clapped her hands with innocent delight, neither child fully grasping the enormity of what their mother was proposing. To succeed where Daniel had failed by respecting the wilderness instead of conquering it, Fawn began by carefully cleaning Daniel's blood from the cabin floor, not to erase the evidence of his fate, but to purify the space for a new beginning based on different principles entirely. As she worked, she spoke aloud to the forest itself, promising the unseen watchers that the Mackenzie family would be different, that they would seek understanding rather than dominance. Next morning brought their first visitor, a grizzled mountain man, so covered in animal skins and forest debris that he seemed more creature than human. As he emerged from the morning mist, his ancient eyes held depths of wisdom earned through decades of wilderness survival, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned the respect of both predator and prey. "Name's Jeremiah Adams," he said simply, settling onto a stump without invitation, "but most folks who know me are dead, so you can call me Grizzly." His weathered hands showed the scars of countless encounters with wild things, yet there was nothing threatening in his manner, only the patient watchfulness of a man who had learned to read the subtle languages of forest and stone. When Fawn introduced herself and explained her unconventional situation, something like approval flickered in the old hermit's eyes, as if her presence somehow validated decisions he had made long ago about the proper relationship between humans and wilderness. Grizzly's knowledge of the local ecosystem amazed Fawn as he pointed out sin and spur that revealed the complex web of life surrounding their humble cabin. He showed her where the wolves denned, where the elk came to drink, where the great bears gathered service berries in late summer, painting a picture of the mountains as a vast community where every creature had its place and purpose. "Daniel Murphy never understood that he was just a guest here," the old man said, settling back against a pine tree with the ease of someone completely at home in the wilderness. "Thought he could take whatever he wanted, kill whatever scared him, never giving anything back to the land that fed him." His words carried no judgment, only the sadness of someone who had watched too many men make the same fatal mistake of viewing nature as an enemy to be conquered rather than a teacher to be respected. As he spoke, Wolf and Raven crept closer, fascinated by stories of mountain lions that walked like ghosts and eagles that soared higher than clouds. That evening, as they shared a simple meal of wild greens and trout that Grizzly had provided, Fawn felt the first stirrings of what might become genuine hope for their future in these mountains. The old hermit's tales painted the Appalachian wilderness not as a hostile wasteland, but as a living entity capable of both tremendous fury and surprising gentleness, depending on how humans chose to interact with it. Wolf hung on every word while Raven fell asleep, curled against her mother's side. Exhausted by the day's revelations, and somehow comforted by the old man's presence, Fawn found herself sharing stories of her own Cherokee heritage, the traditional ways of reading, weather signs and animal behavior, feeling a deep connection forming between her ancestral knowledge and Grizzly's hard-won wilderness wisdom. For the first time since arriving at Hollow Creek, she began to envision not just survival, but something approaching prosperity built on respect, rather than exploitation. Dawn brought the sound of horses and harsh voices as three well-dressed men rode up to the cabin, their city clothes and soft hands marking them as outsiders in this rugged landscape. The leader, a man with calculating eyes and an expensive coat, introduced himself as Preston Blackstone, claiming to represent certain business interests with plans for developing the mountain region. He spoke of logging operations and mining claims, of bringing civilization to what he called this godless wilderness, his words carrying the unconscious arrogance of someone who viewed nature as mere raw material, awaiting transformation into profit. Fawn felt Grizzly tense beside her, as Blackstone explained that he had come to finalize a deal with Daniel Murphy for exclusive trapping and hunting rights across several thousand acres of prime mountain territory. The old hermit's hands moved almost imperceptibly toward the worn handles of his skinning knives, while Fawn realized with growing alarm that their quest for peaceful coexistence was about to face its first and most dangerous test. Blackstone's eyes narrowed with frustrated cunning when Fawn explained Daniel's death, clearly calculating how this development might affect his carefully laid plans for mountain exploitation. His questions about the bear attack revealed a mind focused entirely on eliminating obstacles rather than understanding them, and when he suggested organizing a hunting party to remove the dangerous animal, Fawn felt her Cherokee ancestors' spirits stir with protective anger. Grizzly stepped forward with deceptive casualness, his ancient frame somehow radiating the kind of quiet menace that made dangerous men reconsider their options, and suggested that city folks might not fully appreciate the complexities of mountain justice. The tension crackled between the groups like electricity before a thunderstorm, with Wolf and Raven watching wide-eyed as their mother found herself caught between two completely different philosophies of human relationship with the natural world. Blackstone's final words before departing carried an unmistakable threat. "We'll be back to resolve this situation, one way or another." In the days following Blackstone's visit, Grizzly began Fawn's true education in the deeper mysteries of mountain life, teaching her to recognize the subtle communications that flowed constantly between all living creatures in the forest ecosystem. He showed her how to read the language of disturbed vegetation that revealed animal pathways, how to interpret bird calls that warned of approaching strangers, how to distinguish between the sounds of contentment and distress in the complex symphony of wilderness voices. Wolf proved a gifted student, his young mind absorbing lessons with the intensity of someone who understood that this knowledge might mean the difference between life and death for his family. Raven delighted in learning to identify different animal tracks, creating elaborate stories about the creatures who had passed their way, and gradually losing her city-bred fear of the forest's inhabitants. Fawn felt her own perceptions expanding as she began to sense the mountains not as a collection of separate elements, but as a single vast organism in which every part affected every other part. The mother bear returned on the seventh day, appearing at the forest edge just as Fawn was teaching her children to gather medicinal plants according to Cherokee tradition. This time there was no aggression in the great creature's posture, only a kind of watchful curiosity as she observed the humans who had replaced the violent trapper in her territory. Fawn felt her heart hammering as she slowly approached, speaking in Cherokee and offering handfuls of service berries as a gesture of respect and peaceful intention. The bear's intelligent eyes seemed to weigh her sincerity while her cubs played nearby, occasionally tumbling over each other with the carefree abandon that only comes when a mother feels no immediate threat to her young. When the great creature finally accepted the offering, delicately plucking berries from Fawn's outstretched palm with surprising gentleness, both woman and bear seemed to understand that something profound had shifted in the balance of their shared mountain home. Grizzly watched from a safe distance, nodding approvingly at this first tentative step toward the kind of relationship that few humans ever achieved with truly wild creatures. Word of Fawn's unprecedented contact with the killer bear spread through the scattered mountain communities like wildfire, bringing a steady stream of curious visitors to the cabin at Hollow Creek. Some came with genuine interest in learning about peaceful coexistence with dangerous wildlife. while others arrived with weapons and aggressive intentions, viewing the bear as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it killed again. Fawn found herself becoming an unwitting spokesperson for a radically different approach to human-wildlife relationships, explaining over and over that the bear's attack on Daniel had been defensive rather than predatory, a mother protecting her young from a man who had threatened them with poison and traps. The children adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience, Wolf developing an almost supernatural ability to sense the moods and intentions of wild creatures, while Raven created an elaborate system of signs and markers that helped her communicate with various forest inhabitants. Grizzly marveled at the family's rapid integration into the mountain ecosystem, recognizing in them the rare combination of respect, intelligence, and humility that made true wilderness partnership possible. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds, Fawn began to document her observations in a detailed journal, recording not just animal behaviors but the intricate relationships that connected every element of the mountain ecosystem. She wrote about the way certain bird songs announced the presence of predators, how the flowering cycles of different plants provided food sources for various creatures throughout the changing seasons, how even the most fearsome predators played essential roles in maintaining the health of their prey populations. Her Cherokee heritage provided a foundation of ecological understanding that she combined with careful scientific observation, creating a unique perspective that honored both traditional wisdom and empirical evidence. When traveling naturalists and government surveyors began seeking her expertise, Fawn realized that she was developing something unprecedented: a comprehensive understanding of how humans might live as beneficial members of a wild ecosystem, rather than as conquerors seeking to dominate it. The knowledge felt both empowering and daunting, especially when she considered the forces of civilization that would soon seek to destroy everything she was learning to protect. The moment of true commitment came when Raven fell seriously ill with mountain fever, her small body burning with heat while conventional medicine offered no relief for her dangerous condition. Fawn made a desperate decision to seek help from the mountain itself, using Cherokee healing traditions combined with Grizzly's knowledge of local medicinal plants to create treatments that city doctors would never have considered. Through 3 days and nights of careful nursing, she watched her daughter fight for life while the bear family maintained a vigil at the forest edge, as if the Great Mother understood that another mother faced the possibility of unbearable loss. When Raven's fever finally broke on the 4th morning, Fawn knew with absolute certainty that her family's fate was now inseparably linked to the mountain ecosystem that had provided both the illness and the cure. The experience crystallized her, understanding that true belonging meant accepting both the dangers and the gifts of wild places, embracing vulnerability as the price of authentic relationship with forces far greater than human will or ambition. Preston Blackstone returned in early winter with a larger entourage and official documents, claiming legal authority over vast portions of the mountain territory, his eyes burning with a kind of fervor that Fawn recognized as far more dangerous than simple greed. His men carried surveying equipment along with their weapons, and their conversations revealed plans for clear-cutting operations that would devastate the forest ecosystem within a matter of months. When Blackstone offered to relocate the Mackenzie family to a more suitable location in exchange for their cooperation, his tone carried the unmistakable implication that refusal was not really an option he was prepared to accept. Fawn felt the mountain itself seem to hold its breath as she considered her response, aware that her decision would affect not just her own family's future, but the survival of countless wild creatures who had no voice in the matter. Grizzly's weathered hand rested on his knife handle, while Wolf positioned himself protectively near his mother, and even young Raven seemed to sense the gravity of the moment as she clutched her collection of animal bones and feathers like talismans against the encroaching threat. The confrontation escalated when one of Black men spotted the mother bear watching from the tree line and immediately raised his rifle, claiming the right to eliminate dangerous wildlife in the name of public safety. Fawn's Cherokee heritage flared to life as she stepped directly into the line of fire, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even herself as she forbade any violence against the creatures that had become her neighbors and teachers. Blackstone's cold laughter held genuine menace as he explained that savage wildlife and backward people who protected them, were equally standing in the way of inevitable progress. His words revealing the fundamental racism that fueled his vision of mountain development. The tension reached a breaking point when Wolf stepped forward to stand beside his mother, followed by Raven, and finally by Grizzly, creating a human barrier between the armed men and the forest that sheltered so much life. In that crystalline moment, battle lines were drawn not just between different economic interests, but between two completely incompatible worldviews about humanity's proper relationship with the natural world. Blackstone's retreat carried the promise of overwhelming force when he returned, but his temporary withdrawal gave Fawn precious time to consider options that went far beyond simple resistance or flight. That evening, as she sat by the fire with her children and Grizzly, an audacious plan began to take shape. What if she could demonstrate that the mountains were worth more alive than dead, that the complex ecosystem she had been studying could provide sustainable benefits that far exceeded the short-term profits of logging and mining? The idea seemed impossibly ambitious, yet, as she shared her vision, Grizzly's ancient eyes began to gleam with something that might have been hope, while Wolf and Raven listened with the kind of rapt attention that children reserve for fairy tales they desperately want to believe. Fawn spoke of creating something entirely new, a place where humans could study and learn from wild creatures in their natural habitat, where the bear family and countless other species could live without fear of persecution, where visitors could witness the intricate beauty of an undisturbed ecosystem. The concept felt both revolutionary and inevitable, as if the mountains themselves had been waiting for someone with the vision and courage to propose such an unprecedented arrangement. The next morning brought an unexpected ally, in the form of Dr. Marcus Webb, a naturalist from the Smithsonian Institution, who had traveled to the mountains, specifically to study reports of Fawn's remarkable relationship with dangerous wildlife. His credentials and connections to powerful scientific institutions offered the possibility of official support for her conservation vision, while his genuine excitement about her detailed ecological observations validated months of careful work. Dr. Webb was particularly fascinated by Fawn's documentation of complex predator-prey relationships and her evidence that human presence could actually enhance ecosystem stability. When properly managed according to traditional indigenous knowledge, Wolf demonstrated his ability to identify animal tracks and predict weather changes, while Raven proudly showed off her collection of shed feathers and cast-off antlers, evidence of the peaceful contact her family had established with creatures that most humans never glimpsed in the wild. As Dr. Webb scribbled notes and sketched diagrams, Fawn began to understand that her personal struggle for survival might somehow transform into something much larger, model for an entirely new relationship between scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom, between human needs and ecological preservation. The scientific validation of Fawn's work came with its own complications, as word spread through academic and government circles about the Cherokee woman who tamed wild bears, attracting attention that threatened to destroy the very privacy and isolation that made her success possible. Reporters and curiosity seekers began arriving at Hollow Creek, most of them more interested in sensational stories than in understanding the patient, respectful approach that had made peaceful coexistence possible. Fawn watched with growing alarm as the increased human activity began to stress the wildlife she had worked so hard to protect, with the mother bear and her cubs retreating deeper into the forest to avoid the crowds of gawking visitors. Dr. Webb proved invaluable in helping to manage the media attention, using his scientific authority to emphasize the fragility of the relationships Fawn had built and the need for careful protocols if the arrangement was to survive public scrutiny. Together, they began developing plans for a formal research station that could accommodate scientific study while maintaining the respectful distance that wild creatures required for their psychological and physical well-being. Winter's arrival brought both relief from the tourist invasion and new challenges as Fawn's family prepared to survive their first mountain winter in partnership with the wild community they had joined. Grizzly shared ancient knowledge of weather prediction and food preservation, while the bear family's behavior provided additional clues about the severity of the cold season ahead. Wolf proved remarkably adept at reading the subtle signs that indicated when animals were preparing for hibernation or migration, skills that helped his mother time their own preparations for maximum efficiency. Raven delighted in discovering how different creatures adapted to winter conditions, from the ptarmigan that grew white feathers for camouflage, to the squirrels that cached enormous stores of nuts and seeds. The rhythms of the mountain ecosystem gradually synchronized with the family's daily routines, creating a sense of belonging that transcended mere survival and approached something that might be called home in the deepest sense of the word. Blackstone's return in the depths of winter came with a force that no amount of planning could have fully prepared them. Four-armed loggers, mining equipment, and legal documents backed by corrupt judges who had been bought with promises of development profits. The attack began before dawn with the sound of trees falling, ancient giants that had stood for centuries crashing to the frozen ground, while chainsaws screamed like mechanical demons in the sacred silence of the snow-covered forest. Fawn woke to find her worst nightmares made real as armed men established a perimeter around her cabin, their leader shouting demands for immediate evacuation, while his workers began clear-cutting operations just beyond the tree line. The mother bear's roars of rage and fear echoed through the mountains as her territory was violated and destroyed, her cubs crying in distress as their familiar landscape was transformed into a wasteland of stumps and muddy machinery tracks. In that moment of crisis, Fawn understood that all her careful work, building relationships with the wild community, was about to be obliterated by forces that recognized no law but profit and no authority but violence. The battle for the soul of the mountains escalated as Dr. Webb arrived with federal marshals and court injunctions, creating a tense standoff between corporate developers and scientific preservationists, while the Mackenzie family found themselves caught in the middle of forces far larger than their personal struggle for survival. Blackstone's lawyers had prepared for legal challenges, producing documents that seemed to give his company authority over mineral and timber rights that superseded any claims based on wildlife protection or indigenous heritage. The mother bear and her cubs had disappeared completely, driven away by the noise and destruction of the logging operation, leaving Fawn with a devastating sense of failure as she watched the peaceful community she had helped create scatter in terror. Before the advance of civilization, Wolf's face hardened with premature adult determination as he witnessed the destruction of everything his mother had worked to protect, while Raven wept openly for the animal friends who had vanished into the deep wilderness. The legal battle stretched on for days with no clear resolution, while every hour brought more destruction to the ecosystem that had become their extended family. In the midst of the legal chaos, Grizzly made a proposal that stunned everyone involved. With its audacious simplicity, Fawn could prove that the mountains were already legally protected under old federal statutes that recognized traditional indigenous land use. Then all of Blackstone's claims would become invalid regardless of how much money he had spent on corrupt judges. The ancient hermit revealed knowledge that shocked even Dr. Webb, detailed familiarity with federal regulations dating back to the original treaties with Cherokee tribes, legal precedents that had never been formally revoked despite decades of government policy that ignored them. Working through the night by lantern light, they searched through dusty law books and forgotten treaty documents, finding clause after clause that supported the right of indigenous peoples to maintain traditional relationships with ancestral territories. Fawn felt her Cherokee heritage asserting itself, not just as cultural identity but as legal protection for the land she had sworn to defend, while her children watched with growing amazement as their mother transformed from refugee mail-order bride into a sophisticated advocate for indigenous rights. The discovery of these legal protections offered hope, but implementing them would require resources and political connections that seemed far beyond their reach. The turning point came when the mother bear returned, leading a procession of mountain wildlife that instinctively gathered in defense of their habitat. The sight of elk, wolves, mountain lions, and other creatures coexisting peacefully stunned even Blackstone's men, forcing them to lower their weapons. Dr. Webb documented the unprecedented event, realizing it revealed communication networks in wildlife that science barely understood. For Fawn, the moment confirmed that she had become the center of a struggle larger than herself, one that questioned humanity's entire relationship with nature. Media coverage of the gathering spread nationwide as Dr. Webb's photographs and Fawn's accounts reached newspapers and magazines. Support poured in from scientists, tribal leaders, and ordinary citizens inspired by the Cherokee woman living in harmony with feared predators. Financial contributions flowed to establish a sanctuary based on indigenous knowledge, while public opinion turned sharply against Blackstone and his allies. Yet Fawn knew that sentiment alone could not secure the sanctuary. They needed unassailable legal ground to win. That foundation arrived when Cherokee elders appeared with documents proving Fawn's legal standing as caretaker of ancestral lands never formally ceded. Chief Walkenbear, carrying treaties still valid under federal law, reframed the conflict as a matter of indigenous rights and historical justice. His presence gave the movement legitimacy and moral force, while his alliance with Dr. Webb merged traditional ecological wisdom with modern science. At the same time, escalating violence from Blackstone's hired mercenaries revealed the stakes, forcing Fawn to balance protecting wildlife with safeguarding her children amid threats that endangered everyone involved. The crisis climaxed when Raven went missing, later found in a hidden cave after trying to save an injured wolf pup. The rescue, guided by the mother bear and supported by Cherokee healing and survival skills, united the community more deeply than any legal battle. Raven's recovery became a living symbol of hope, proof that coexistence between humans and animals was not just possible, but necessary. When Blackstone's men attempted to dynamite the cave, triggering a landslide that trapped humans and wildlife together, Fawn emerged as leader. In that valley-turned-prison, the sanctuary's vision became undeniable. Survival itself depended on cooperation between species, a truth that neither violence nor greed could erase.